Michelle here with David Leaf. He's an author, he's made movies, he's a music historian. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Michelle. Always happy to talk about music of the 60s, especially Brian Wilson.
Exactly. This is Ask the Expert, our daily feature, your chance to learn something new every day. And you're an expert on Brian Wilson.
So I guess I am. It's he and I were friends for almost a half century. And so I had, I started out as a journalist writing about him from the outside, and then we became friends. And so I had an inside understanding of what it was like to be him.
How did you initially encounter Brian Wilson back in the day?
Well, I moved to California from New York with the intention of writing a book about Brian Wilson. And I was at the local Y shooting baskets with a friend of mine from college, and two guys walked onto the basketball court. One of them was about 6'7", guy named Stan Love, the brother of Mike Love, the lead singer of the Beach Boys. He had just retired from the NBA. And with him was Brian Wilson. And he said, "You guys want to play 2-on-2?" And it was like as surreal an experience as one could imagine. And the whole time we were playing, I was thinking, how are my friends back east going to even believe this? Because it made no sense that it was happening.
Now, did you go to that particular place because you thought sometimes he goes there, or you were just hanging out?
No, it was the Y I joined near where I lived in West Los Angeles.
Oh my goodness. Well, sometimes when you think it happens. What does that field of dreams? There it is.
Well,
I don't know.
there's no question about it. I mean, when I was in college and my roommate and I went down the Brian Wilson rabbit hole, we became obsessed with him and the music of the Beach Boys and Smile in particular. But I also as kind of this outraged young person, which we were in the 60s and early 70s at what was going on in the world, I just sensed something was wrong. And he said, "Well, if you're so upset about it, why don't you do something about it?" And I said, "Okay, I'm going to move to California, write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help him finish Smile," which was, certifiably insane. But honestly, I moved here 50 years ago, almost to the day, here in the fall of 2025. So it's 50 years ago. And on the second day I was here, I was crossing the street, and walking towards me was Dennis Wilson, Brian's younger brother. And I walked up to him and I said, hi. I was not shy, or at least I could pretend not to be shy. And I said, "Hi, Dennis. My name is David Leaf. I just moved here to write a book about your brother, Brian." And he just laughed at the notion of it. And he said, "Good luck." So literally 3 years, almost to the exact day of that meeting, my first book, The Beach Boys and the California Myth, was in stores.
Well, they had quite a story. I mean, I loved Love and Mercy. I thought John Cusack was amazing in that. And I think that's maybe an introduction to people that might not know that much about the Beach Boys. At least they got to see, a little bit of that. And so Smile in particular, I was looking it up, like it wasn't finished, but then it got finished. Like kind
Correct.
of like
So in 1966, Brian had as great a year as any pop artist ever had. First, he composed, arranged, and produced Pet Sounds, which came out in May of '66. Then he went back to a song that he had first worked on during Pet Sounds, but he said, I want to put that aside for something else. A little song called Good Vibrations.
yeah.
And he spent months and months working on that. And that became the Beach Boys' first number 1 million selling single. While he was working on that, he engaged this remarkable young man named Van Dyke Parks as his lyricist on the next project, which they named Smile. And while they worked on it for a good 6 months or so, at a point in time where the record company was demanding, where's the new album, where's the new single, where there was internal strife within the Beach Boys, where there was internal pain within Brian, he put it on the shelf, and it sat there for
Wow.
for decades. And it wasn't until 2004, so we're talking 37 years later, that he went back to it and finished it not as an album project, but as a live performance.
Hmm.
And it just kind of blew everybody's mind. It was a gold album. It sold almost 1 million copies. His best selling album as a solo artist. He did a worldwide tour performing Smile every night for 18 months. He won his first Grammy, which is hard to believe. He hadn't won a boatload
Yeah.
of Grammys before then, but he hadn't. So he won his first Grammy. And most importantly, or two things. One, it made him really happy that he had done this. And the other thing was what we had always believed was that if he ever finished it, he would make more great music. It had become this albatross. And so it wasn't anymore. And he wrote a new, what he called a rock opera called That Lucky Old Sun, which he put out in 2007. And then he did an album of Gershwin songs. Brian Wilson reimagines Gershwin.
Wow.
And the Gershwin estate actually gave him 2 unfinished Gershwin songs for him to finish.
Wow.
So kind of all of his dreams finally came true, despite the remarkably terrible roller coaster of a life that he had. As an artist, he had returned to who he was, which was a great artist. And a big step along the way towards all of this was live performing. And so the Live at the Roxy album that's coming out was very early on in what you might call the second act, this renaissance that he had. And it was wonderful to see, wonderful to be part of. And now people could hear, the entire recordings from both nights at the Roxy.
Ask the expert here on Camaradio 1013, listener supported community radio. David Leaf is here. Books, movies, you've done so many great things. Primarily, we're focusing on right now the Brian Wilson Live at the Roxy reissue and your book that came out, Smile, about the history of the album. What can you, like, Brian Wilson, like, he's a genius, but he also seems like this just kind of shy guy. Like, it just like the contradiction of, he could have been an Elton John, like, what, all over the world, but he was more laid, like, behind the scenes guy, even though he was
Well,
the true Gemini,
he was, his closest comparison in that regard is Sir Paul McCartney. They were born 2 days apart, the same year.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
They ended up as the bass players for their groups whose names began with the letters BEA, and they were both signed to the same record company. So that's the comparison. Paul loves to perform. Brian didn't. And he was a very reluctant stage presence. Part of it had to do with how bad the sound was on stage in the 60s. Part of it had to do with him being shy in front of a large group of people. In front of a small group of people, he was kind of a clown. He loved to make people laugh. That was what made him happy, was evoking laughter, not by saying anything mean about something, because so much comedy is about hurting somebody in some way, or even yourself. He just loved to make people laugh. And so Smile was kind of his cosmic idea of laughter, this a whole album that would make you smile. And ironically, when one listens to Brian Wilson presents Smile or the Beach Boys Smile sessions, there's not a lot in there that makes you smile. It's really not music. It's serious, deep music, and it makes us smile when we listen to it. It sure doesn't make us laugh. There's a couple of moments that do. I mean, when everybody's pretending to be an animal or eating vegetables on stage, but for the most part, it's deep. It's as deep as anything he ever wrote.
And how do you think, like, it's interesting how the Beach Boys have been around, for decades, their music, it never sounds dated. It's just, the songs are so, you know what I mean? Like, I could listen to Good Vibrations. I teach workouts. I put it on every class. I don't care who's in the room. I'm like, that's the jam. So,
The compositions that he wrote that were inspired, the first piece of music he ever heard was Rhapsody in Blue. And then when he was a teenager, he became obsessed with jazz harmony through groups like the Four Freshmen and the Hi-Los. And his younger brother, Carl, was a rock and roller and turned him on to Chuck Berry. And
oh, wow.
it was this kind of very simple combination of a rock and roll beat and jazz harmonies. Well, you say simple, but go ahead and do it. So he was indeed the one. He didn't like being called a genius until much later in life. When he was called a genius in the 60s, he said, "I'm not a genius. I'm just a hardworking guy," which he was a hardworking guy, but he would say, "Well, I'm ingenious." He was kind of denying the genius notion, but why does this music survive and thrive? And can you listen to it and get the good vibrations that he put into it? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, he's a genius, and so the music is filled with brilliance that nobody could really understand other than you could feel it. And the feeling in the music is what to me matters the most. And I think sadly, the music is so powerful because Brian's life was so unhappy in many ways, that he was creating these good vibrations to make himself happy, to make himself feel good. Because there's a tremendous strain of melancholy throughout all of his work, but not in Good Vibrations. Other songs on Smile, certainly. Other songs from the beginning of his career. You take a song like "In My Room" or "The Warmth of the Sun" or "Don't Worry, Baby." There's just a sadness to it that strikes you deep in your heart. And the up-tempo hits, as he explained once when his brother said, "Why do you think we connected?" And Brian said, we celebrated the simple joy of living. And
Yeah.
that's I'm not going to come up with a better explanation than that.
So writing liner notes for music or an album or how do you approach that? Because it can only be, I mean, a book you can just go on and on. You got just a little bit of quip on everything. That's a
You know,
unique talent.
well, thank you. I've written liner notes, I guess, for about 25 albums, and the liner notes for Brian Wilson Live at the Roxy were probably the easiest because I was there. Almost every other liner note I've done was for an album that came out when I was 11 or 12 or 13, or in my 20s. But having been there, I could revert to what I had started out as, which was just a journalist. What's the story to tell that's going to make people want to listen to the record, or if they've listened to it, read it and go, "Wow, I wish I could have been there," and realize, okay, well, the music that's on these albums or CDs will get you there. And it was was a remarkable two-night stand at the Roxy because, as I said, he was not a happy live performer. He started performing solo in 1999, and the band that he helped put together during that time was made up. His LA contingent was the Wonderments. Then there were a bunch of Chicago studio musicians, really good players. And in between was a guy named Jeffrey Foskett, who had toured with the Beach Boys for a decade and sounded like his brother Carl. So they were able to recreate the sound he had made in the studio. And I think that's what sets Brian Wilson Live apart from a lot of other live acts that are making great live albums, but they're not trying to duplicate the record. Mm-hmm. Brian's band, especially Darian Sahanaja and Nick Walusko and the late Nick Walusko and Probin Gregory, these guys, Brian's records were biblical to them. You didn't mess with them. And so their job was, as they saw it, was to recreate every sound, not just the notes, but it was like, okay, what guitar was the guy playing on that song? So they really did everything in their power to make the backing on these live recordings sound like the records themselves. Now, they'd be the first to admit they're not the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys are the greatest vocal aggregation ever. And, they were Brian's vocal instrument. The band that he toured with for those decades didn't have blood harmony. I mean, in the Beach Boys, you had three brothers and a first cousin. So there's a certain sound that makes that you can duplicate the notes. And these guys in Brian's band were great at that. And they could do it with feeling because they loved what they were doing. But there's something about, Brian taught his brothers to sing harmony in their bedroom when they were kids. And that's magic.
Beach Boys are timeless. They always will be. All of their music is just, you can't not like it. Even if you're 5 years old right now, somebody put on a Beach Boys song, that little kid's going to be running around. You're like, I guess he likes Little Deuce Coupe. I don't know. It's just going to happen,
There's a joy in the music for sure.
We're here with Ask the Expert on Camarillo. And David Leaf is here. He's got the Brian Wilson reissue is coming out for Live at the Roxy and the books. And you worked on a Bee Gees movie. You've done so many things. I looked you up. I was like, wow, this guy's got it all. How did you become a journalist? What point did you, besides writing, was that just it? You wanted to write the book on Brian, or were you writing before that and stuff?
No, I was a sports reporter when I was in junior high school, writing for the school paper. And in my senior year at high school, if you were the sports editor of the school paper, you also wrote for the local paper, the Standard Star. Nice. So when I was 16 and 17, I was making $35 a week writing sports stories.
That's pretty good money.
It was really good money back then, really good money. And I didn't even want to go to college. It was like, I'm going to go to college and try to get this job back. But I did go to college and studied journalism. And I remember reading Edward R. Murrow's autobiography. I'm sorry, it was a biography of Edward R. Murrow. And I had seen him on television when I was younger. And what I came to understand that's relevant to all of this is that by telling a story, you can actually change the outcome of the story. So during the McCarthy era, his reporting helped bring down Senator Joe McCarthy. His documentary Harvest of Shame helped in some ways make it better to be an immigrant farmer. I mean, it certainly didn't solve most of their problems, but it's shown a light on what was really happening to make you think, while you're eating those grapes, do you know who's did the back-breaking labor to do that? And so he had been in London during World War II, And just in the back of my head was this idea that if you told a story, you could change the outcome. Well, that was really what my first book was about, the Beach Boys and the California Myth, which was grabbing. I felt like I wanted to grab the world by the collar and shake them and go, "Don't you understand how important this guy Brian Wilson is?" And I don't know if that worked, but 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 it helped a little in that we became friends, and eventually I got to make a documentary about him and Smile called Beautiful Dreamer, Brian Wilson and the Story of Smile. Eventually I got to do a tribute concert to him at Radio City Music Hall. That was as staggering a night of talent as one could imagine. I mean, we had Paul Simon and Billy Joel and Elton John and Ann and Nancy Wilson from Heart and David Crosby and Sir George Martin and Cameron Crowe and Wilson Phillips reunited for it. I mean, it was just an amazing, amazing night of people paying tribute to Brian, which is all I wanted people to do was honor who this guy was and what he had done. And given what he had done, shouldn't he be treated better? That was really the motivating factor.
Wonderful. Oh, wow. How exciting to have that journey from sports to bringing the awareness to Brian Wilson and everything. Did you write the first book on the Beach Boys? Was that one of the first books?
It was one of the first books. There had been Ken Barnes had written a book, but mine was really
I know Ken Barnes.
The first full-length feature book, if you will.
David Leaf, you're a wealth of knowledge. I'm excited to listen to the reissue. Hopefully we can get a vinyl copy and dig into all your other projects that I've discovered. So thank you so much for being here. And I guess real quick, what's next? What are you cooking up next?
That's a good question. The last 16 years I've been teaching at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music.
Nice.
So I get to share my passion for music history with young people who, they sat in the back of their parents' cars listening to what their parents wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And so I get to tell them the stories of these artists who they may have heard a few songs of and like the music, but they don't know the story of the Beatles. So I had to have a course on the Beatles. And,
nice.
In terms of books, I have a million ideas. Books take a long time. So like my book that came out in 2022, God Only Knows, the story of Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and the California Myth. It was a reissue of my 1978 book with a massive update because a lot had happened. So the update was actually half as long as the original book. So I've got lots of stories to tell. The question is, will people want to keep reading them? And I hope so. In the meantime, just keep listening to Brian Wilson music, Beach Boys music, great music, no matter where it comes from, because it's out there. You mentioned the Bee Gees, maybe the most underrated and unfairly scorned group. They're kind of dismissed as a disco band, but that's not who they were. They had a whole bunch of great albums long before Saturday Night Fever. And Saturday Night Fever, they wrote these great songs for a movie that their manager was producing, not knowing what was going to happen and become the biggest selling soundtrack of all time.
Not knowing how great they really were. I mean, it is. Yeah, exactly. Wow.
They were really, really amazing. Only Barry survives, the oldest brother. And the greatest honor for me was in 2022 when I asked Barry if he would write an introduction to my Brian Wilson book.
Oh, that's cool.
And he said yes. He says, do you have any idea how much I love Brian and how much of an influence he was on me and how much I wish I could have worked with him? So one of the things we've seen since Brian's passing is this outpouring of love and for Brian and his importance in popular music. It's not just that he's great, But the people who have been influenced by him, going all the way up to today, a group like the Lemon Twigs, the lead singer, the older brother, his name is Brian Paul, named after Brian Wilson and Paul McCartney.
Oh,
So the legacy finds its way into the 21st century in every which way. But there'll never be, there won't be another Brian Wilson. That's not going to happen. Any more than there's going to be another Mozart or Beethoven. What they created is very special, and to hear Brian just reemerging from his shell on Live at the Roxy is just joyous.
we're looking forward to checking that out again as the reissue. And thank you, David Lee, for being on Ask the Expert on Camaradio, 1013 listener-supported community radio. We'll catch you on the next book. How about that?
I'd love to. Thank you for having me.